5:30 in Adelaide, where Erin is. And yeah, 6 o'clock in Sydney time. So, shall we make a start? What do you reckon? Ready to roll? Okay, welcome everybody. Lovely to see you. Please say hello in the chat and ask any questions. The plan for tonight is for Erin, who I'm going to introduce in just a second, to work through her presentation, and then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A time as well, where you can ask all your special questions. If it's really specific to you, then I would recommend that you book a consultation with Erin. She's worked with a number of people that we coach, and they've been really happy with the results that they've had with her. So that was why we thought we'll get Erin on and have a chat tonight. So to introduce Erin, Erin is an accredited practicing dietitian and accredited sports dietitian with 13 years experience across private practice, research, teaching, and hospital settings. She is also a keen recreational runner, participating in events up to 100 kilometres across New Zealand and Australia. In 2018, Erin married her passions for nutrition and running by developing a sports dietetics practice. Ultra Appetites is the name of her business, and I've linked it on our Facebook main page, and I'll also link it in the groups after this. Erin's practice is dedicated to translating research into practical advice to support recreational runners in their health and performance. And Kerry was just doing a little bit of stalking on Erin before, and found out that she had run Tarawera 102k in 2018 and was 14th female. So pretty impressive runner herself. So welcome, Erin. I really appreciate you taking your Sunday night to chat with us. And nutrition is such a big topic. It's an area that can make or break races. So yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you. That's a pleasure, Ali. I'll just make sure I've got my screen working for you. I am presenting. Cool. So, can you guys see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Fantastic. So everyone can see the slide. Beautiful. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Ali and Kerry, for having me on tonight. It's really great to have an opportunity to present to all the runners out there about something that I'm really passionate about, which is nutrition and running. So this is a pretty sort of, I guess, a bit of a whistle-stop tour through nutrition for endurance runners. So hopefully I'll cover off a few of the points that people put forward to Ali that they'd like to know more about with nutrition and running. So yeah, we'll get started. I'll just point out this front page. I have used this slide for an event in South Australia, and I guess just sort of promoting where I come from. You can see a lovely picture here of the Five Peaks Ultra Marathon, which is a 58k run held here in Adelaide, usually sort of in May, which is a lovely run if anyone's ever keen for travel. All right, so today my aim for all of you out there is to try and help you improve your knowledge about sports nutrition for endurance running, and to give you some practical strategies to support your health and performance. So just a bit of an outline. I'll just chat a little bit about what a sports dietitian is. I think sometimes we're a little bit mysterious to people. We'll go through a bit around training, nutrition. We'll talk about body composition, a little around pre-race and during race nutrition. And then depending on time, we'll go through a bit around supplements, gut issues, muscle cramps, and recovery. So first of all, a sports dietitian is an accredited dietitian who goes on and does some additional study through Sports Dietitians Australia. So to become a dietitian, we need to go to university. There's a bachelor's degree, or you can do a master's degree. And that involves in your final year doing placements in hospital settings. So we kind of learn how to deal with people with different medical issues such as diabetes or cancer and that type of thing. The sports dietitian's course is a four-day course that's used to be held with AIS. And we then have mentoring and ongoing professional development that we do as part of the process of being a dietitian and sports dietitian. What we really do as our job is help you to understand scientific knowledge and use it in a practical way. And particularly in the sports setting, we're really helping you to try and eat better without putting you on diets, helping you to improve your energy levels so you can train well and compete well, avoid injuries or recover faster, help manage gut issues or food intolerances, work through the wonderful world of supplements and, help you to decide whether they're appropriate and if so, how to use them. And really just, I think the big thing is saving time, money, avoiding confusion, and helping you to get things right. So someone asked a question about, does nutrition really matter in terms of sport? And this was a slide that was shown to us actually when I did my sports nutrition course that really hit home for me. This was a study, I think it was in cyclists, and it was a 40-kilometre time trial that involved some novice athletes all the way through to elites. And they looked at different things that they might include as part of their sort of training towards an event, in terms of how much time it would help them to improve their performance by. So you can see on the screen, you've got CHO, which is carbohydrate, water and caffeine, body mass or weight, aerodynamic wheels, obviously people on bikes like those sorts of fancy things, your position on the bike and the frame, the weight of your bike, the altitude, so if you've done that sort of training, and then your general training plan. And what you can see here, well, the first thing that really mattered was the aero body position and frame, but then after that, your nutrition and your training were actually really very similar in terms of the performance benefit that they gave you. So I think this really does help us to understand that, yes, nutrition really is important, and you can train as much as you like, but if you're the best athlete in the world, if you mess up your nutrition, your performance is not going to be good. So yes, nutrition really does matter. In terms of generally what sort of things we need to think about as runners, it's really not about any individual nutrient or food. It's really about an overall quality diet that also provides you with enough fueling and nutrients to support your training. The first one to really cover is calories or kilojoules. So this is what gives us our energy so that our body can perform well in terms of its overall health. So making sure, we're producing enough hormones to have periods regularly, having enough calories to support the health of our bones, but also having enough calories on board for performing well in exercise as well. And I think there is a little bit of a problem with, some runners who do tend to chronically underfuel. And that does have a number of risks to not only performance but also health. Carbohydrate. So these are our breads and cereals, rice, pasta, noodles, fruits and vegetables, like starchy ones, so potatoes, sweet potato, legumes, including baked beans, lentils, chickpeas, and then some dairy foods as well. So milk and yogurt contain quite a bit of carbohydrate, and then obviously you've got your sports nutrition products too. Carbohydrate is what our body likes to use for exercise, for fuel. We know that when you're working at a higher intensity, carbohydrate will certainly be the most dominant fuel out of carbohydrate and fat. But even at the lower intensities, we will start to burn more fat, but carbohydrate will still always be the dominant fuel. So it is really important that we include carbohydrate if we're wanting to get good performance. We store that as something called glycogen in our muscles and liver, but it's not a finite store, so we do need to top it up. Another thing that carbohydrate can do is it can actually help to reduce the stress response, which involves a hormone called cortisol, and that can help with recovery in terms of reducing that sort of what we call catabolism or breakdown of tissues such as muscle, so that way we can actually start to repair the damage that we've done in exercise, and also supports our immunity too, so lower the risk of things like getting a cold. Protein. So protein Actually, I'll use my mechanic analogy that I always use. Protein is like going to the mechanic. You need to go regularly so you don't break down. It helps to promote recovery. It maintains or increases muscle and supports immunity and also adaptations to training. So your protein foods are things like your meats, poultry, eggs, fish, dairy, then nuts, legumes as well, and obviously supplements too can be there too. Fat's the other big nutrient that provides us with energy. Great source of storage for energy. We've kind of got almost infinite amounts of fat on our bodies to keep us going for many, many months. It can be used as a fuel for exercise, more so at the lower intensities where we're burning more fat. It helps in producing hormones. Some fats, like your omega-3s in oily fish, can help with reducing inflammation, and also contributes to the structure of our cells. Now we've got the little guys, the vitamins, the minerals, and the antioxidants. They have a huge number of functions in the body, some of these being in metabolism, like your B vitamins, contracting muscles, so calcium's got a role there. Bone health, again, calcium, and then the health of your blood and your immunity too. Fluid, so fluid helps to deliver nutrients to our muscles, and it helps to regulate our body temperature, which obviously is really important during exercise. And then the darling of the nutrition world at the moment, which is fibre, that helps to protect our gut lining, and that helps to reduce the risk of any sort of toxins or pathogens getting through our gut and then into the rest of our body and potentially causing problems. There's associations with poor gut health and things like increased risk of various diseases like diabetes, mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety. Fibre helps to produce normal bowel motions. It manages our cholesterol level, helps to control our blood sugar level, and can reduce the risk of disease and illness. So as you can see, there's lots of bits that we need to think about. Coming back to that carbohydrate, so now we know that this is really very important for our exercise. It's about thinking about, well, when do we really need to be focusing on that the most? And this is where we think about, a bit like that car analogy again, fueling for the work that is required. So before exercise, depending on the session, you might want to have quite a bit of carbs on board so that you can perform. If you're going out for a long session, you may well need to be having some carbohydrate during that session so you can keep performing because you've got enough petrol. And then after exercise, depending on what your recovery goals are, carbohydrate might be important as well. So just some general things to think about is, any endurance event where you're really looking for performance, so more than 90 minutes, you will need to think about carb loading if you want to do the best you can, including carbohydrate in your pre-exercise meal. Any exercise of 45 to 90 minutes or longer, and that depends on the intensity and your level of training, I would be considering having some carbohydrate. And then after exercise to top up your fuel stores again and reduce the stress response. And, it really is really individual. So you need to know what you need, and, copying what your friend does is not necessarily going to be right for you. So this is where it does really help to speak to someone that can give you some professional guidance. You will use a little bit of fat and small amounts of protein during exercise, but taking this on during your session won't improve performance, and it does run the risk of potentially causing some problems for your gut. So I've talked about that analogy of the car and fueling for the work required, and that's sort of, I guess, where periodized nutrition comes in. So this sort of term is thrown around a little bit now. The definition of it that I found in a paper, the strategic combined use of exercise, training and nutrition, or nutrition only, with the overall aim to obtain adaptations that support exercise performance. So there are various things you might do in terms of periodizing your nutrition. So there's a few examples here. One of them might be what we call train high. Some people might think that means train at high altitude, but in this sense, it actually means train high carbohydrate. So this is a session where you really want that performance. You want a nice full tank, fueling you all the way through to the finish line. And that, I would just say, training high is probably something that, you'd want to be doing when you're looking at competition nutrition and training for your events as well. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got train low. So this is actually having low carbohydrate availability. So this might promote some training-induced adaptations of working muscle and potentially could help with fat loss. So yeah, certainly, some particular events this might be relevant. So probably ultra endurance, marathon, maybe half marathon, you might do a little bit of train low. There are some risks associated with doing this in that, you can actually just end up under fueling, which will cause you problems in the short term that you don't perform well, but also in the long term that your health might suffer. And there are different ways that you might actually do training low as well. So it might be that you just generally eat a low carb diet. It might be that you have a fast overnight, so just sleeping, and you go and run the first thing in the morning without having breakfast. So there's different ways you might use that, but I generally don't recommend people do this more than once or twice a week, just because it can potentially cause some longer term problems. And be mindful that when you train low, everything you're training will feel harder because you don't have that fuel there ready to go. Other things, so you've got train the gut. Your gut is like a muscle. It will learn to adapt and to digest and tolerate food better during exercise. So you want to make sure you're doing that, particularly close to an event. And then also training with supplements if they're relevant. And that's, something that I would really encourage speaking with a sports dietitian about if you're considering using those things, to make sure you're using them appropriately. These pictures here show us a little bit about fueling over different times of a training week. So you've got here in the blue, easy training or weight management, and you can see on your plate you've got your carbohydrate-based foods, your proteins, and your veggies and fruits. So in our easy training or weight management plate, we don't need as much fuel, so the carbohydrate portion there is smaller. If we move on to moderate training, so this might be, sort of an hour of sort of a quality run or something like that. You're looking at maybe a third of that plate extending to being carbohydrate-based foods. If you're then going on to really hard training, so this might be, your long run day when you're doing maybe, 3 hours plus, you really want those carbs to be a big focus of your meals. And remembering this is fueling before, not after the fact. There's no point putting petrol in the tank when you finished your run. You needed it when you started. A few people did ask about how do I, get enough in when I've got my heavy training load. So I've got some pictures here of some different, options you might try. So it's really about having plenty of quick, easy snacks. They might not be foods you classically think of as healthy foods. So, you do have things like a muffin here, or this is a piece of banana bread with some ricotta and honey on it. It's about getting enough calories in and making sure that they're calories that provide some carbohydrate as well. If you're finding, just eating all that volume of food is tricky, you can use drinks. Up and goes, I often encourage, people to have some of those stashed somewhere. They're UHT, so, you can have them in the car ready to go after a training session, or just your good old chocolate milk works well as well.
Hey, Erin, sorry, Naira just popped up and said, would train high or train low be dependent on where you are in your training cycle, or would it be defined by the session that you're running?
Yeah, good question. I think that really depends on what your coach is trying to work on with you. Mm-hmm. My experience, with coaches that I'd had is that we kind of work on different things all throughout the week rather than in blocks. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, Ali, if that's, the same sort of approach you have with your runners.
Be that way.
Yeah. So it really, when I develop my training plans, which actually is the next page here, I'll just dump down. Hopefully this is big enough for everyone to see. You can see here we've got a runner who trains predominantly in the mornings, and we've got the days of the week here, and then down here we've got all their meals and snacks. And this training plan is color-coded to indicate times when fueling needs are higher, so essentially carbohydrate is higher, and that's the yellow boxes. And then we move through the orange, which is lower carbohydrate or moderate carbohydrate needs, and then to the green, which is sort of the lowest level. So you can see here this runner, his runs are not too different in length throughout the weekdays, He does have some speed sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays where we've got him fueling up a little bit before. But we do have a bit of train low here. So, his 60-minute easy run on a Saturday, he's not having anything beforehand. And he has had sort of not a huge amount of carbohydrate at night for his sort of size. But then if we look here on a Sunday, he's got a long run. We really want him to get through that run well. It's 2 hours. I don't really encourage people to be running for, 90 minutes to 2 hours plus without taking some fuel with them. So we've got him training high. He's had, a bigger serve of carbs at dinner that night. He's got a good bit of carbs before he goes out running, and then he's taking carbs with him while he's doing the session as well. So yeah, it really does fluctuate throughout the week, and obviously it can get quite a lot more complicated if you're doing double training days and really long sessions. So I think people that I've done this sort of thing for find it really valuable as an educational tool. It might give you a snapshot of your training nutrition just for that sort of period of time with your coach, but you can actually adapt it depending on what happens with training in the longer term, because you learn about how to fuel different sessions appropriately. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right. I think this is something that as sports dietitians, we often come up against. A lot of athletes are quite focused on, weight loss as a tool to get faster. And really, I think, everybody has their own optimal body composition for performance. So just because, someone weighs 50 kilos and is performing well doesn't mean that you are going to perform well at 50 kilos as well. Some of the benefits you might get from optimizing body composition include that you might have a higher power to weight ratio. So that could be really helpful for pushing up big hills, or, if you're a cyclist, like going up a mountain on the road, and also potentially helps with regulating body temperature as well. So it just helps to keep you cooler when you're running. Be wary of the tools that are used for measuring body composition. There's lots of them out there, and they all have pros and cons. Dietitians commonly use skin folds, which involves calipers and pulling back some fat from the muscle, which is quite a robust tool to use, but you do need someone who's trained to do it accurately. There's DEXA, which is dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, which involves an X-ray and is very detailed, but certainly, not the level that most recreational athletes need to be thinking about. And then you've got BIA, which is another one that you might come across, probably more so in like a local gym, which is a tool where it actually puts an electric current through your body to measure the resistance between different tissues and give an estimation of what's lean tissue, what's fat. But really, I think, out of all of this, the most important thing with any of these tools is that monitoring change over time is much more important than looking at once-off measures. You want to know how your training and your diet is working for you, and, seeing how your body composition changes in response to that is how you figure that out. Beware, there are risks. If you go too far, you potentially lose muscle and power. You might underfuel your sessions and not perform very well. Not recover well or adapt to training. And at, the very worst end of the scale, I think, is just developing eating disorders. So I've got some pictures here of a few athletes that I thought were worth talking about. The first one, we've got Serena Williams here, who everyone is very well aware is a fantastic tennis player. However, she's got quite a different body composition to some of the other females in her sport. And I think what this shows is that, there's a lot that goes on into making someone a good athlete. And obviously, Serena's body composition works really well for her. She's obviously very muscular, got a lot of power, which, is what makes her so great. We've got Mary Kane over here. A few people may have heard of her. She's was a runner for Nike and spoke out against them about some problems she was having with comments around body size and body image. Specifically, she's too fat, her breasts and bottom are too big. She was put on a diet that left her so hungry she secretly stole from her teammates, which she ate in the bathroom. And even after she won the 3,000 metre junior world championship, she was still berated about her weight. And unfortunately, she ended up not continuing in her sport. So that's quite sad. I also wanted to just point out that it can happen to males as well. I think sometimes we don't realize that or forget about it. So this is a runner called David Proctor, who was from the US. He was about 59 kilos and nearly 6 foot tall in this photo here. So quite underweight. He actually gained about 7 kilos and then went on to break the 4-minute mile barrier. So actually putting on that weight was a really good thing for him. So I think, if you're wanting to play with body composition, really do have a think about whether it is something that is worthwhile for you. And I think it's something that I would really encourage to get support with. Just a few tips specifically around fat mass. If you are wanting to reduce it, if you are particularly sort of have quite a lot on board, then you can make some changes. So these include keeping your protein intake high at main meals and for at least one snack every day. Lots of veggies and salads, and 30 plants every week. And that's not just veggies and salads, but also different types of grains. So you've got, things like your quinoas, farro, buckwheat. We've all got different variety of different micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals in them, which are really great for our health, and lots of different types of fibers as well. If you're looking to reduce energy, do that on days when you're less active, rather than trying to do it on days where you've got heavy training sessions. So make sure you really are fueling properly still for those key sessions. And rather than thinking about a, restricting sort of mentality, try and think about I want to fill my plate mentality with the nutrient-rich foods that are going to, keep me well and keep me full. Be mindful about eating. So, taking your time with meals, enjoying them with friends and family, taking the time to actually talk about your food and how it tastes and enjoy the appearance of it. I think too often we, get caught sitting at the desk at lunchtime at work, just bolting food down while we're checking emails, and we don't even realise what we've eaten. Be organised. When you've got a busy training schedule, you want to make sure that food isn't going to become, really challenging by having, things not prepared. So, plenty of quick snacks around, things in the freezer, bulk cooking, making sure you know how to cook. If you haven't got good cooking skills, going to some cooking classes, or maybe going and spending time with some friends who know how to do some cooking. And having a repertoire of some easy go-to recipes that you can use throughout the week. And ideally, know your nutritional requirements and get an individualised strategy, which a sports dietitian can help with.
Erin, we normally want to ensure our athletes have, good energy availability to, complete the sessions and get the adaptations that, we're trying to elicit from the stress being applied. However, that when you do that in training, and a lot of the training is about increasing training load, increasing volume, increasing, say, total stress throughout a training cycle, it's very hard to find those moments where, over the course of, more than a few days or, a few weeks where you're looking to remove a few kilograms, it's hard to do it in the, say a base phase where there's a lot of mileage and hours and duration. And generally speaking, I have encouraged athletes, if they are looking to find a couple of kilograms, to move it closer to, the sharpen phase, not necessarily the taper phase where they're wanting to increase carbohydrates for the event, but when they're doing less volume because the cardiovascular adaptations are less likely to, they're not a sought after adaptation in, 4 weeks to race day. So really it's that 5 weeks to 3 weeks block where we're doing less mileage, less running, that if at all, they want to be looking for kilograms to remove. That's around about the time to look at it. Is that what you would say would be a fair sort of objective?
Yeah, I was saying, if you're looking to get to race weight, it would depend on the individual person, but maybe 4 to 6 weeks out, maybe 2 weeks out at, the closest would be when you'd be wanting to really target that. It's challenging to get that weight down, particularly for someone who's, potentially already quite lean as it is, being a runner. You look at the elite athletes and you see them running around at the Olympics and you might think that they look like amazing and that's how they always look. But, they've probably worked really hard to get 2 or 3 kilos off before that key event in that last sort of few weeks. And for the rest of the year, they're probably actually quite a bit heavier than that. Look, I definitely think you need to be careful about when you plan to do it. I think if you can try and train mostly within a couple of kilos of race weight, that's ideal. But obviously, some novice runners might start off well above that, and so they might be someone that actually could kind of sort of big ongoing losing that small amount of weight. So yeah, I think it really depends on the individual athlete, but particularly at that pointier end where you're more well trained and that more elite level, I would be looking at really peaking at the sort of times you suggested, Kerry.
Thanks, Erin.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the exciting race stuff. So there were a few questions around carb loading. So I'm going to talk about, I guess, different durations of events because carb loading is not always relevant. But some things that are certainly important to think about for all races is fibre. Fibre is a fantastic thing for our gut health, as we discussed earlier. However, it can be problematic if we have too much before a race, just in that it can lead to gut problems. So reducing fibre by avoiding skins and seeds, choosing things like white bread instead of wholemeal, not having nuts, dried fruits, that sort of thing can be a good thing to do. You shouldn't need to be having any specialised sports nutrition products in the days before your race. I know some people will be loading up on magnesium sachets or having extra salt or taking expensive products, and really these aren't necessary. You can just do it through food, and always keeping yourself well hydrated. So for an event of 90 minutes or less, there really is no benefit to carb loading. I do still encourage to be having carbohydrate foods at meals and snacks during those 2 to 3 days pre-race. For an event of 90 minutes or more, carb loading can certainly be helpful. So the way carb loading works is that it helps to increase the level of glycogen in our muscles, which is our fuel stores. It can almost effectively double that store, so that can be a really big extra source of energy for our run. Over a set distance, you're looking at a performance improvement of potentially about 2 to 3%, which can be a pretty significant amount for only having made just the carb loading as the change. How much do you need is the big question. So 7 to 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight per day for about 36 to 48 hours pre-race, and it will be individual and it will depend on the event. That is a massive range. I find most people, will struggle to even hit the low end of it because they're just not used to eating that amount of carbohydrate. And potentially for masters athletes, so those that are kind of 35 or older, maybe 8 to 10 is probably plenty. How does it actually look? So this is a picture of what it isn't. I think a lot of people think of carb loading as that pasta meal the night before the event, and I can tell you now, if this is all the carb loading this guy's doing, he's not actually going to get enough carbs in. Also, that looks quite unappealing to me. So this is an example carb load plan. This is something similar to what I might do before an event. So you can see you've got main meals and snacks. A few things that I do particularly for myself. I do actually have a little bit of fibre in the morning, but then I'll reduce it for the rest of the day. But certainly, you could use a lower fibre cereal like cornflakes or rice bubbles if you're really sensitive with your tummy. Sorry, I'm jumping around. You can see there's lots of drinks in here. So juice, sports drink, we've got hot chocolate down the bottom. Fluids can be a really good way to get some carbohydrate in without making yourself feel really full. And it really comes down to what ones you like to have. Also, sugar is quite prevalent. So you've got sugar on my cornflakes at afternoon tea. I've got marshmallows in my chocolate. I've got a finger bun with sprinkles on it, which I always look forward to before a race. So, a lot of people might think, oh my gosh, like all that sugar, that's not good for me. No, it's not good for you if you do it every day. But in the short term, for a day or two before an event, it can be a really good way to get more carb in. So, think about it. I do have a salad with my dinner, and that's just because I like to have it. But if you really wanted to cut that fibre back, you would be looking to limit that. This is trial it in training. You need to give it a go during your lead up, during some of your big weekend running or whenever your long ones are, and work out what works for you. Because certainly my plan won't suit everybody. Pre-race meal, this is your last chance to top up your glycogen stores before you get going. So you're looking at some sort of high-carb meal or snack 1 to 4 hours before you race. And again, the timing, the amount and type of food and drinks depends on you and what you've trialed in training and what you know works. As a general rule, you don't want to be having foods with a lot of fat or fiber that will hang around in your gut and, potentially make you feel uncomfortable. Protein as well is something that I wouldn't really be making a major focus before a race. Some people find that they can't tolerate solid foods, so they will go for more like a smoothie, or you can use something like Sausage and Sport or a sports drink. And yeah, including some fluid as well to make sure you're well hydrated before you get going. So yeah, again, the big thing here is trial and training, see what works for you. So this is during your race, your nutrition. So this picture here shows us different duration of event along the bottom. So you've got 0 to 3 hours and beyond. At the top, we've got the type of carbohydrate that's used and then the amount that's used. So the type of carbohydrate refers to different carbohydrate sources. So we've got a couple that we need to think about in running, which is glucose and fructose. These two different types of carbohydrates are absorbed through different pathways in our gut. And the glucose pathway is saturated at 60 grams an hour. So we can't actually get any more carbohydrate across if we try to have more glucose than that per hour. So that's where if we're going beyond 60 grams an hour, we need to actually use an additional type of carbohydrate, which is fructose. So anything beyond 60 grams an hour, you want to have what we call multiple transportable carbs, which is glucose plus fructose. If it's under 60 grams an hour, it doesn't matter if it's glucose or fructose because you're going to be able to absorb it well. The amounts to have, so for up to 30 minutes, really, you don't need to have anything. For 60 minutes, about 45 to 75 minutes, small amounts may be useful, or even rinsing your mouth out with carbohydrate. There's a certain protocol you can do to do that, the receptors in your mouth actually detect the carbs and it helps with performance. Once you start going longer, so really that sort of 60 minutes to 2.5 hours, you're kind of looking around that 30 to 60 grams an hour. And then when you're going beyond that 2.5 hours and up, it could be anything up to 90 grams an hour. This is a huge range, and again, it is an individual thing. It depends on you, your pace, what you can tolerate. I can tell you now, I don't have any runners that are on 90 grams an hour because it's a lot to get down. You really want to have a well-trained gut, and you'd probably be moving at a fairly decent pace if you were having that much per hour. Maybe if you're a cyclist, that might be a bit easier because you don't have that jostling that you get with running. That might make eating all that carb hard. But, I would say most of my runners are probably somewhere around that 30 to 60 grams.
Erin, just the carbohydrate sources, the energy pathways that the body's processing there, if you think about a common aid station that we see at an ultra marathon, obviously you've got our simple carbohydrates, our sugars, sucrose, candies, those sorts of things. There'll be complex carbohydrates are quite common for sandwiches and pretzels and those sorts of things. But also very common, we do have those fructose. We have the sliced oranges and often watermelons and those sorts of things. It's hard to know, obviously, when an athlete is approaching these sorts of things. They're also at the same time consuming perhaps a race fuel, which is maltodextrin, which is another carbohydrate, long chain glucose pathway. There's a lot of things happening here. That top line, in fact both lines of that graph, how is an athlete meant to conduct themselves entering an aid station? Are they meant to look at this table and then be able to relate all of the things on the table to say this slide, for example, or what do we expect them to do?
Yeah, it's really tricky when you think about what is in what I'm eating. Look, if you're looking for more than 60 grams an hour as your carb target, you really do need to use specialized sports nutrition products. So there are a variety on the market that have that 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio. So Infinite have one called Premium Fuel. There's another brand called Performance that do one, and a few other ones as well. So I would really be encouraging anyone that's really trying to go about 60 gram an hour to find one of those products and use that as their dominant fuel, and then be using some other things to top up, as they go. In terms of the amount of fructose in a piece of orange versus a piece of watermelon, like there's no point getting caught up in worrying about that. You don't want to be spending your race trying to think about it. So I think really, if you want to go over that 60 gram an hour, just look for those special sports nutrition products. And if you're not going above that, then have what you like, really.
Erin, there's a couple of questions in the chat. So one is 90 grams per hour equates to roughly 360 calories. Is this correct? Is this what we're suggesting for a long race?
So in terms of calories, we don't really talk about fueling in terms of calories in sports dietitian world. You've got to think that you're actually also burning quite a lot of fat as well when you're doing your exercise. So obviously this carbohydrate doesn't count that in. So we don't we don't really think about the calories. It's more about the carbs.
Okay. And another person says, presumably the grams per hour depends on how much we weigh.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd have to go back through. There's actually a blog piece on that, I think, on the My Sports Science website, which would be worth looking at. So it actually doesn't matter. Interesting fact.
Here. Is it more? This is really more related to the speed at which an athlete is likely to be operating. So just to be clear, those athletes that are looking to push, the front of say Tarawera 102k or the 50k ultra sort of thing, and they're panning at the top 10 finishes, top 13 finishes, maybe, Erin. They're more likely to be fueling multiple pathways, high amount of calories per hour, as opposed to say the 100-miler athletes that are working through the night or moving a little bit slowly. Is it their burn rate's lower, therefore their intake requirements are obviously lower as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we know as well that those people on the podium are generally the ones that have had higher carbohydrate intakes. So I think that is something for people to think about. Find out where you're sitting and see if you can push it. See what your gut can cope with, and see how it impacts your performance. Because you can, as you can see at the top here, you can train your body to digest and absorb that carbohydrate better. So every long run, get out there and have your carbs. Don't go out there and not eat and drink, which some people might do. You might even, if you're really wanting to push it to that 90 grams an hour, you might even be wanting to do some really specific gut training for a couple of weeks close to an event to try and help you to really absorb that carbohydrate and use it as best as possible. Yep. All right, so I think we've probably covered this a little bit already in that question, but what fuel specifics should you use for your race? So this is just a picture of lots of different things that you could try. I think, particularly if you're doing an ultra endurance event, you want to have lots of variety. Flavor fatigue is massive when you're out there for a long time. So some sweet things, some salty things, some crunchy things, some chewy things. Make sure it's easy to get down. If you're doing something like a sandwich, I suggest cut the crust off. Don't have packages that are going to be finicky and annoying to open and take you forever to eat. You've got your classic sports things, sports products down here, so your drinks, your gels, your bars, but there's heaps of real food options. Some ones that are pretty popular generally are things like your fruit, Vegemite scrolls. I don't know if you have them in New Zealand. We love them here in Australia. Banana, honey, peanut butter wraps, shapes or other savoury crackers, rice balls. Be a bit thoughtful. Obviously, if you've made rice balls and you're out for a 100-mile event, they might be a bit gross and a bit dodgy to eat by the end of the event. So think about what's practical for you as well. Some things, if it's a really cold event, they might actually go too hard and be too hard to bite. Other things might turn into a liquid mess in the heat. So, I guess trial things in training, see which ones you like, and try and have as much variety as you can.
Lots of carbohydrates there. Can I just, the other obvious macronutrients, there's not really a whole heap of protein in that picture, and there's really, other than a little bit on the chips, there's not a whole heap of fat. Now, why is it specifically there's not large amounts of protein and fat in that on that picture?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not going to help you with performance, and they're probably going to make you feel, things will sit in your stomach longer. So fat and protein delays what we call gastric emptying or stomach emptying. So that's the reason why we don't really want too much fat or protein in your performance nutrition. Yeah. Okay. Someone asked the question about, is one type of fuel better than another in terms of solids versus gels versus drinks? So this graph, or these two graphs, kind of explain that quite well. So the first one you can see here, you've got some gels and water in the red, or you've got just sports drink only. On the side here, we've got the amount of carbohydrate that this person is burning per minute from what they've been taking in. And then you can see the time that they're doing their running for. This one actually was in cyclists, sorry, it was 2 hours in cycling. So you can see here the red line and the yellow line, they are really basically right on top of each other. So what this tells us is that there's really no major difference between whether you use a gel or a sports drink with carbohydrate use. If we look at this one here, we've got the sports drink again, and then we've got some sports bars with water. So again, the lines follow pretty closely. I know they do deviate a little bit here, but this is really just a trivial difference, and it's actually not significant in terms of, the difference between them. So I think what this shows is that use whatever carbohydrate source works best for you, whether it be gels, whether it be sports drink, whether it be solid foods. They're all going to be very effective if they've got carbohydrate in them for performance. All right, drinking. So this really depends on sweat rates. A lot of people haven't actually ever really checked their sweat rate. It's quite a simple thing to do. It involves weighing yourself before and after a running session of at least an hour. And looking at what the difference is in terms of the weight, which tells us how much fluid you've lost. When you do that, you want to factor in if you've been drinking anything during the session as well. And you will find that it changes quite a lot depending on the session you've done, the temperature, how hot it is, how humid it is. So they can vary anything from 300 mils to 3 litres per hour. And if you do get some information about your sweat rate, you can then start to plan your fluid needs for your races so that you can make sure you maintain hydration. And the reason we want to do this is we know that when you dehydrate, performance will suffer. Anything of sort of about 2% body weight loss or more, you will start to see performance deficits. In an ultra event, when you're out there for a really long time, you will lose some body weight just from fuel use as well. So that 2% rule might not be as useful, but it still can be useful to do in your training sessions just to get a bit of an idea of what sort of fluid you might need to have. If you haven't done a sweat rate test before, a guide that you might use is about 125 to 250 mils per 20 minutes in a high intensity exercise session. And remembering that your stomach can only absorb about 1 litre of fluid per hour. So, if you were doing a race where you were needing 3 litres per hour, your sweat rate was that high, it would be quite challenging to get that fluid in. Aside from the performance losses with dehydration, we do also see people get more gut issues when they dehydrate as well. So that's something to be mindful of. You can go the other way and overhydrate. It's probably more likely to happen in an ultra where you're out for a really long time, you're moving slower, you've got lots of access to fluid at aid stations and in your backpack. And this can cause problems such as, again, gut issues. But probably the one that people get a bit scared about is something called hyponatremia or low sodium in our blood. And this can have some, pretty serious effects on us, which range all the way through to, getting a headache, nausea, vomiting, feeling fatigued, irritable, muscle weakness, and at the worst of it, there have been a few deaths reported, about 14 or 15, I think, in the literature. I guess the thing here is if you are someone that is slower, you really want to be careful about how much fluid you're taking on board. It doesn't really matter what fluid you have, so sports drinks, water, cordial, soft drink, they're all okay. And there's a little bit of a guide with your different race types, depending on the duration and the intensity, you can kind of start to think about your fluid strategy. So less than 1 hour, you're pretty likely to maintain your hydration quite well without having anything to drink. But if you want to have a drink, go to thirst. 1 to 3 hours of high intensity or greater than 3 hours with some high intensity efforts. I'd be thinking about having a personalized plan. So you can really try and minimize that dehydration and also the overhydration problem as well. And then if you're looking more at the ultra endurance events, more than 3 hours, consistent pace, kind of quite low intensity, drinking to thirst may well be a bit of a safer option, just because over the course of the day, the conditions are going to change so much. Your sweat rate will be different, and your pace is going to be constantly changing. So having a really strict plan can make that a bit tricky. There are a few people that weren't sure about sports drinks. I know that there are some that are quite marketed towards runners. It really doesn't matter which one you have. So have which one you enjoy and know what's in it and how to use it as part of your plan is really my advice there. Some of them are quite expensive. As a dietitian, I'm not here to market any particular brand over any other. I'm here to help people, save money, get good performance, and look after themselves, really. So, just be cautious if there are brands that are really promoting that they're going to do something pretty wonderful for you beyond other products. You can get some in little sachets that are quite convenient for tipping into bottles during events. They're a bit more expensive than using stuff that's in bigger tubs. Some of them, you'll find in this local supermarket. Others you'll have to go and hunt around online. Think about how you're going to carry them. If you're not using these individual sachets, a lot of people just put it in Glad bags. A nice little trick I learned from a client was putting it into these sort of tubes, and then you can tip that quite easily into your bottle without it getting everywhere. And if you've got a support crew, get them to do all the mixing up and mucking around for you and just swap bottles. Salt. This one is a pretty interesting area that we really don't know as much about as people might think we do. So this is some information that I picked up from actually something I listened to just this week from a sports dietitian, Alan McCubbin, who is doing a PhD or has done a PhD, in sodium and sport. So you can see here a picture of someone with the salt crust on their hat. I think a lot of people might have experienced that at certain times in their running career. So we do need some sodium or salt during exercise. It helps to transmit nerve impulses. It helps in muscle contraction, maintaining normal fluid balance and our blood pressure. Possibly may have a role in reducing risk of cramp, but there is debate about that, and we don't really know 100% what is always the cause, and it's likely to be a number of factors. Sodium can help encourage fluid intake just because it makes you feel thirsty. It can help to improve absorption of fluid from the gut, and also just give you some different flavors as well. So how much do you actually need to replace? So what I picked up from what I listened to the other day was if you're looking at, something like a 4-hour event, you're probably not going to need to replace more than about 70% of your sweat losses to maintain that less than 2% body weight loss. So in that situation, less than 4-hour events, the sodium is probably not so important, and it's really about seasoning to taste. So whatever you kind of like for your own enjoyment. If we're going more than 4 hours and you're intending to replace a large amount of the fluid you're losing, the risk is that you can kind of end up overloading on water without that sodium there and run into the risk of something like hyponatremia. So this is where I would be thinking about, I probably do need to replace some sodium. How much you need to replace. So you can do a sweat sodium test to see what the concentration of your sodium is in your sweat. That's not always easily accessible to people. So in the absence of that, I'm just encouraged to include some foods and drinks that contain some salt during the event. So things like chips, Vegemite sandwiches, most sports drinks will have sodium in them as well. Some people will be using salt tablets, which may be relevant, but I think it is an area that we still don't really know a lot about, and we don't have clear guidelines on. So if you are wanting to experiment with that more, you could speak with a sports dietitian about a plan specific for you.
Erin, most of the sports drinks we have are filled with electrolytes, or we're using noon tabs or something electrolyte based. Is that probably fulfilling our sodium requirements?
I would suspect probably it would be. The other electrolytes in there probably aren't really that necessary. Things like your potassium and magnesium, you're not going to be losing anywhere near as much as you would of sodium, and you'll probably be getting plenty of that from diet anyway. But yeah, I think, using those sorts of products is fine. Yep. All right, general strategy for a race plan. Thinking about, per hour, what am I going to do? I'm trying to get that, 30 grams an hour, 60 grams an hour, whatever you kind of work is suitable for you. Having a plan with your fluid. You might be using something like your sports drink, and then including some different foods. So this is sort of my plan that I did for a race a while back. So I had a combination of some salty and crunchy things, some gels, some sweet things, and then using a bit of other fluids as well. I don't know if you guys in New Zealand use cold very much, but that can be quite nice in a race as a bit of a little booster. But really, this is just a general plan. So I'm going to show you something a bit more specific, and this is just a section of a race plan that I have made for a client. So this is a 100K plus ultra. And this is thinking about the logistics of, well, I know what I want to do per hour, but how am I actually going to achieve that in my event? Knowing where your aid stations are, knowing what's at your aid stations, what food do you have, what drinks do you have? Can I bring some drop bags and put some special things in there, or will I have a support crew that can bring things to me? Am I going to eat things when I go through the aid station? I'm going to be having them on the trail. Thinking about when you're going to be topping up bottles, and thinking about the whole day, really, like, is something going to work for you at a certain time of day? So caffeine is one thing that people can be quite individual about how they might use it. Taking it at the start of an ultra might actually be a really bad idea if you're looking for it as a performance enhancer, because it may well end up that you get too excited at the start and run really hard because of that caffeine in your system, which will then bite you later in the race. This sort of plan, if you are thinking about really targeting a key race and you want to go through, your different fueling options, your supplements, your hydration, your carb loading, I would ideally, if you can, give yourself 6 months to go through it properly and really practice everything as much as you can to know that it's going to work for you. These are the sorts of things that sports dietitians can help you with. Now, I'm mindful of time, so Kerry and Ali, what would you like me to do from here?
I think carry on, Erin. I'm happy to continue if you are happy to keep going.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right. So
50 people watching. Everyone's happy to keep going. So yeah, let's keep rolling.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. So supplements. Supplements are not a major thing that I think a lot of endurance runners think about, because I guess we don't have, it's not really like some other sports, things like bodybuilding and weight-based sports. I think they're probably more prevalent, but there are some that are evidence-based for runners. But when you're thinking about whether you're going to use them at all, I think there's a few things to ask yourself. So firstly, is it safe? Does it have products in there that maybe I don't want in my body? So we know that a number of products might actually have banned substances in them as well. and they may not have what the label actually says in them either. Is it actually effective for my situation? So, for example, I'm trying to think of a good one. So something like, a whey protein powder. Well, that's not going to be a useful supplement to take in the middle of an ultra because it's just protein. So you want to know that it actually works for what you're trying to achieve. Has it worked for me before? So this is about trialing and training. Don't go and try a supplement on race day when you haven't had it before and you don't know how it's going to affect you. And lastly, is it actually worth it once you've thought about all those other questions? So I think a lot of people who look at sports nutrition product information will be thinking, oh, it's all about the supplements. That's what's going to make me faster. And actually forgetting that really we need to get that base diet right first. Then we think about our sports nutrition strategies. Supplements are the icing on the cake, if they're relevant at all. So really have a good think about them if you do plan to use them. One that I will talk about is caffeine. Caffeine is well known in endurance sports as a performance enhancer. It is AIS, or Australian Institute of Sport Group A classified, which means there has good level of evidence of performance benefit, and it's safe and legal to be using as well. And that's across all different types of sports, and including endurance sports. When you're looking for something that's going to be a safe product, these are a couple of good little logos to look for. These logos indicate that your product has been batch tested, which means that it's gone through and been run. I think they usually look at a couple of hundred different chemical substances that could be in that product to see if it's got anything that's banned in there. So that's really something for, if you're an elite athlete and potentially going to get drug tested, you really want to make sure your products have those logos. But even as a recreational athlete, if you want to make sure you're not having something that's dodgy, I'd be looking to find something with those logos as well. How much caffeine you need? So it's a variable range. 1 to 3 milligram per kilo is on here. It might even be up to 6 milligrams per kilo. This is of your body weight. And you're looking at performance benefit, again, of around about 2 to 3%. There's lots of ways we get caffeine. So it might be coffee, it might be a commercial product, something like no-dose. Know the dose that's in your product. A lot of the time, some of these sports products may have a token amount of caffeine in them that's not really going to do much of anything at all. Sometimes you might get a real shock, and something like a standard espresso coffee could be anything from 30 milligrams of caffeine up to 250. And so you don't really know what you're taking at all. I definitely encourage people when they're using it for performance to try and use something with a known dose. And again, trialing and training. But the way it works is it helps to reduce your perception of effort and fatigue. Taking around 1 hour before a race, or you might be using it throughout a race or towards the end of a race. It doesn't really matter in terms of the performance. It's really about what works best for you. Gums and chewing strips are around as well. They are absorbed more quickly. They're about 15 to 20 minutes to get into your system. And remember that the half-life of caffeine is quite long, so around about 6 to 7 hours before it's dropped to half the level in your body. So I think a point of that is, if you're taking big doses of caffeine, don't be taking them every hour, because you're just going to be getting way too much caffeine that your body actually doesn't really need. Because the risk of that, if you're going overboard, is it actually has a negative effect by increasing your heart rate, which makes you feel harder, impairing motor control, which might affect skill. So, if you're running, you might find you're actually tripping over roots and rocks and things, getting over-aroused or anxious, or stomach upset. So always try and use the lowest dose that is effective for you.
So, sorry, Erin, the duration of our races, some of them get out to quite ridiculously long. So when athletes are suddenly faced with being in day 2 of a run, and it's 2 a.m. and they're partway along West Nukatina, and they've got they're 140 k's into something that's 160 k's long, sleep becomes a major problem, and drowsiness and fatigue. Are we encouraging athletes to perhaps offset their caffeine intake to match circadian rhythm?
It depends if you're going to be, I don't know the answer to the circadian rhythm bit, but I would say you've got to be thinking about when you're wanting to be really performing and, yeah, using it as strategically as you can. Like if you're planning to try and sleep, obviously you don't want to have been dosing up too heavily on caffeine in the hours before because you're not going to sleep. But if you are planning to keep running through, I don't really know about the circadian rhythm. I think, a lot of people will try and use caffeine more at night because that's when you will be tending to maybe be more sleepy, because we normally would be sleeping at night time. But yeah, I don't really know the answer to the question specifically around circadian rhythm.
I think we just end up with a lot of athletes that are really tired but hyper alert and need to poop.
Need to poo, okay. Yeah, so be careful because it builds up in your system. Like, again, there was something I watched this week, and it was just someone in their normal day looking at, they were having coffee a few times a day, like from morning through to the sort of mid-afternoon. They're waking up the next day, and before they'd even had their first coffee, they still had quite a bit of caffeine in their system. And if you're doing that day after day after day after day, your caffeine level is constantly building up. And so you've got to be careful with that in those really long events because you might actually end up just really struggling to get any sleep at all, which obviously that's not going to help your performance. So there is a little app you can use called Caffeine Zone that you can actually plug in when you have caffeine, and it shows you how quickly it might get out of your system. So that could be something you could play around with. All right, gut issues. So this is a pretty complex area. I'm not going to go into huge detail about it. It is really common, unfortunately, for runners. I'm someone that suffers from it myself. So 30 to 50% of distance runners do generally report some sort of gut issues, and the longer the event, the higher the prevalence. We know in things like 160k ultra marathons, it can be over 90% of people report some sort of gut problems. There's lots of things going on with our gut when we exercise that may be contributing, and everyone is individual into what might be their problem areas. Some things might be just the mechanical jostling up and down of the running movement. In terms of some body functioning aspects, so when we exercise, the blood is directed towards the muscles to help us to exercise. And we get less blood going to the intestine, which can mean that the gut doesn't have that blood flow and it's not going to be able to work as well. And we also have a variety of stress hormones released, which can also impact the motility or the movement of the gut. In terms of nutrition, some things that might contribute are things like too much fat or fiber or protein, which tend to delay the emptying of contents from the stomach. Also, having too much concentrated carbohydrate will also delay the emptying from the stomach. So if you're having like really strong sports drinks, that could be a problem, or just having a lot of gels without enough fluid. And if you're taking in large volumes of food, or fluids, so if you're kind of only just going through an aid station and trying to get all your nutrition and hydration, then that potentially could cause some issues as well. And we divide these symptoms into the different parts of the gut. So you've got your upper gut symptoms, things like burping, vomiting, heartburn, bloating. Lower gut, so cramps, flatulence, needing to defecate, diarrhea, and worst case bleeding. Then some other symptoms you might get, like nausea, feeling dizzy, needing to wee, or getting a sciatic or a stitch. Some of the risk factors for gut issues, if you've got a lot of stress or pre-race nerves, so if you are someone that experiences that, try and find ways to manage it. Unfortunately, females get more problems than males. The longer duration or higher intensity events will be more problematic. If it's hot or humid, if you've had a history of gut issues, if you get dehydrated. Big one that I always tell my clients is not practicing race nutrition and hydration. So please trial it in training, train that gut. And also some medications might also increase risk of gut issues as well. That's a picture of Paula Radcliffe there, who had a little bit of a problem during one of her marathons quite famously. So yeah, it happens to lots of people. Some things you can do to try and help lower the risk. So make sure you practice your nutrition and hydration, limiting fat, protein, and fiber. A possible role for something called FODMAPs, which is an acronym for a number of different types of carbohydrate that we find in different foods that can sometimes not be very well absorbed in our gut, and can lead to going down lower into our lower intestine or our colon and fermenting, and then causing a lot of sort of uncomfortable gas, bloating, potentially loose bowel actions, that sort of thing. So you may be wanting to limit FODMAPs in the lead up to a race and or during. Caffeine might increase the risk, so that might be something you need to avoid. Try and use the bathroom before you get going. Maintain your hydration. Try and have your carbs and fluid in small, frequent amounts rather than just, once an hour or once every half hour. Keeping your carb concentration to less than 10%, which most sports drinks will do. Maintaining an appropriate pace or intensity. So if you're going really hard and you've never changed nutrition with that, you've got more risk of gut problems, and avoiding non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which is things like Nurofen and Voltaren. If you do have problems, try and just back off your food and fluid a little bit until you can start eating and drinking again. You can try the carb mouth rinsing strategy, just slowing down your pace, and possibly ginger might be something that could help with nausea. But yeah, I mean, the strategies, they really depend on the individual person, and it's very hard to know exactly what's going on without actually doing some lab testing. A sports dietitian can certainly give you some educated guidance and a bit more of a strategic way to work through the problems, rather than you trying to fumble around and do it yourself. But sometimes it can take a while to get to the bottom of it, and sometimes it might not be nutrition related at all. It might be that you need to actually work on doing some more stuff around stress and anxiety management. Muscle cramps. Again, they're pretty prevalent. So 30 to 50% of marathon runners have reported these at some point in their running. There's lots of theories about why they might happen, and they are really hard to study because, as you can imagine, trying to get someone in a race when they've got a cramp to suddenly have a lot of tests done them is not really practical. So the way we kind of work these things out is, doing like observational questionnaire study where we look at historically what happened to people who got cramps, or we might put them in a lab and try and actually electrically stimulate a cramp, which is a pretty nasty thing to do to someone, but that's another way we can test it. Some of the thoughts are around electrolytes, but the reason this was thought was that for people that drink a lot of water without any sodium, they were found to be more prone to getting cramps in a study that was, I think, some minors a long time ago. Being dehydrated potentially could have a role, heat or cold stress, but probably the most likely cause is an alteration in your neuromuscular function due to being extremely fatigued. Some of the risk factors are being fatigued, older, long duration events, hot and humid, not training very well, males, and some medications. So what's actually happening when we cramp? So you've got here a picture of someone's calf. There's two things that help to control muscle function. So we've got something called the muscle spindle. This has stretch receptors in it, which increase the contraction of our muscle. Then we've got something else called the Golgi tendon organ, which when the tension is high, the tension receptors decrease the muscle contraction so that it doesn't overcontract. When we're fatigued, the stretch receptors make that muscle contraction more forceful. The tension receptor activity actually drops, and that doesn't protect the muscle from the overcontraction. So we then get the overstimulation, which then leads to that cramp. Some things you can try to do to lower your risk. If you can, do some plyometric or eccentric muscle strengthening exercises. So, jumping, running down hills, that sort of thing. Make sure you're well trained. Ensure your fueling and hydration is on track, so you're not fatigued and increasing the risk of a cramp. And if you've got any muscle imbalance or posture imbalance, to correct that. If it does happen, stretching might help, slowing down. Pickle juice is an interesting one. There's a little study that was done that showed that drinking about 60 ml, I think it was, of, just double check that. It was 30 to 60 mils of pickle juice. So it's thought that what that does is it helps by stimulating a neural reflex in your mouth, which actually inhibits the firing of the neurons in the muscle that's cramping. So yeah, this was done when they were stimulating electrical cramp in some students and comparing it to water. But, you know, it's a small study, and yeah, I think it needs some more research to really back it up, but you know, you could try it. And then massage is another one. Last but very much not least, we've got recovery. Recovery is, again, something that you really need to individualize to your performance and health goals, and to what you're doing with your training. So the main things you need to be thinking about is hydration or fluid, repairing, which is down to protein, replenishing, so that's topping up your fuel stores, which is carbs, rebooting, which I use for immunity or your immune system, so that's, you know, good vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. Resetting, sleep, haven't talked about that much, but it is critical to get enough sleep for your performance and health. And then one that came out from the Monash study group recently is regulate, which is about making sure we're looking after our gut function as well. So yeah, I won't go into great detail about this now, but with your recovery, really think about, you know, what did you use in that session? Did you use a lot of fuel? Did you use a lot of fluid? Did you do a lot of damage by running up and down hills, so you need to hit the protein a lot harder? Are you going to be training again within the next 12 hours, and so you need to really, you know, make sure you do top up that fuel quickly? Or do you have 2 or 3 days before your next session, so you've got plenty of time and you don't need to be smashing things in straight away? There's lots of different options you can use. A few practical ideas for post-race, you know, things like, again, your milks and up and goes, muesli bars. Could just be something like a sandwich or your next meal. There's a lot of high protein yogurts around that can be quite helpful now. Yeah, and ideally, you know, you're kind of wanting to start your recovery nutrition within that first hour, so you're kind of getting the maximal benefits of using it. And that's it. So yeah, it's a really quick tour, I guess, but I hope I've answered a few of your questions and given you some ideas. I think something you probably picked up a lot is, you know, trial it in training, and it is an individual thing. So if you really wanted to get some more clarity on how to put this all into practice, I do encourage getting some help if you're wanting to take it to that next level. But yeah, good luck, and thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Erin. It's been really appreciated. I think we've probably answered a lot of the questions on the go. Like, do you have any time, like maybe 5 minutes or so, to, if there's any more specific ones?
Yeah, that's fine.
So, if you guys do have any questions, then let's give it another 5 minutes just to ask, ideally more broader spectrum questions, not ones that are just like totally specific to you. But yeah, if you've got a question, then that's a burning one, then fire it at us.
Man, it's I got to say, Erin, it's epic when you kind of you just covered everything in an hour and 10 minutes. So I don't know, what does it take to become a sports dietitian? Is it like 4 years of research? You just boil it down. 1 hour, you're done. Drop the mic.
Look, there's a lot more to it. So obviously, as a sports dietitian, you know, I'm talking to people, I'm counselling people through diet. I'm helping them to understand what quantities and different things are in different foods. I'm helping them to work through their relationship with eating. I'm looking at their body composition. I'm doing, you know, skin folds on them. I'm, looking at blood tests, lots of different things. So, it might look like, there's not that much from just trying to run through it in an hour, but this is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah, I feel like you just throw a skipping stone across a lake there. You know, you really just like move so quickly across all of the topics. You know, we do these these Facebook lives and various things where people are like, I'll give you an hour to explain training for an ultra marathon, and I'm like, this is a profession of a decade at least for us, but I don't think I can boil it down to an hour. I'm going to try though. You did a great job. That was awesome.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's helpful.
Ali, was there anything from the questions in the comments that stands out that requires answering still?
Only Scott Moy is saying, what's your favourite recipe for Vegemite scrolls?
Oh gosh, I buy them from Baker's Delight.
There you go, Scott.
Do you have that in New Zealand as well? I think you do.
We do, yeah, we do have Baker's Delight. I'll have to go and check out the mall tomorrow and see if there's any. If it's just an Australian thing, we're in trouble. We have Marmite in New Zealand.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Joe Munn has said, is training your gut as simple as practicing your nutrition?
Not necessarily. So yeah, I mean, it's your fluid as well. Sometimes you might actually be doing some really targeted stuff where you might be doing things like, eating a meal really close to your run to learn how to tolerate that volume in your belly. So yeah, not necessarily.
And Liv has said, I may have missed it, but is fluid output something to be aware of during longer runs, i.e. how much we go to the loo?
Oh, yeah, interesting one. I'm not an expert on this area by any means, but funny things happen when we exercise with our bodies. Some people, the way they produce urine, actually, that there's changes in the hormones when we exercise, and so we may not actually produce urine in the way we normally would. So sometimes we retain the urine, or we don't make as much. So yeah, whether you wee or not during a run is not always a great indicator of hydration.
Okay. Murray's just put beetroot juice question mark.
Yeah, he had asked earlier about beetroot juice. Is it worth the squeeze?
That's the one thing that I didn't cover. That's a big thing in endurance sport. Again, it depends. It depends on what sort of event you're doing and the individual person. Some people respond to it better than others. So we know that elite athletes don't really tend to respond as well as recreational athletes do. And, like the other supplements, making sure if you are using it, you've got the correct dose, you've got the right protocol to use it, you're taking something safe and you know that it works for you. But there certainly can be a place for it. A bit like the caffeine, it's an AIS category A supplement. So good evidence, and it is considered to be safe.
It's that old vasodilation thing, eh? It's probably on your opposing triangles. Start with getting the training right, start with getting the base diet right, and then you worry about the dimes on the floor, and don't ignore the $10 that's on the table.
Yes, correct.
Looks like the last question is from Caitlin. Any tips for reversing the effects of too much caffeine mid-race?
Oh, you've blown it. There's nothing you can do.
So don't go there.
It's in the system. Bad luck.
Put a change of undies in your drop bag. Actually, we did have an athlete who had a big bender one night and then performed well the following day at a race by consuming a packet of No-Dos and a bunch of multivitamins. So he realized he had cracked the code. So standing on the start line of a 100k ultra, he applied the same strategy, and throughout the course of 100ks continued to bombard himself with No-Dos and multivitamins. And when he arrived at the finish line with only half of his mandatory gear, we asked him what had happened to it all, and it had been used one piece at a time to deal with the problems that he was having along the way. And discarded in the bush was a high-vis jacket, thermal leggings, a bandana, and many other things. So there is a limit. It's certainly an upper limit to caffeine, and people have tried to push past it.
Yeah.
And it didn't go well for him that evening. He had no sleep and he was in and out of the toilet for many hours.
Oh, poor guy.
If a little bit of something is good, a lot of it must be better.
I love it. Murray's just said, this is sounding like a good way to finish this chat, Kerry.
Yeah, good one. All right, fam, I will end our live stream, and thank you all. This video will remain on the YouTube channel, and that link will still work. Thanks, Erin, for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And people can get in touch with you if they want to book a consult and step into their nutrition strategies, and possibly more important, their diet and training as well, to ensure that they get the most of the adaptations that we're trying to throw at them.
Beautiful.
Thanks for your time. And
Thank you for having me. It's good.
Thanks.